Hi, this is Cameron from ZappyRide, and you're watching ZappyCast. ZappyCast is an omni-channel media production brought to you in part by ZappyRide that focuses on collaboration and conversation with the brightest minds in the EV space. Each episode will focus on different themes going on within the electric vehicle space right now. In each episode, we'll bring on guests from their relevant industries to talk about what's going on, to provide insights, knowledge, news, and talk about what's going on in the world of EVs. We look forward to you joining us for this ZappyCast. Enjoy. As the EV industry continues to grow, it's important to consider the potential problems that could arise in the next wave of adoption. We'll cover a variety of these issues, from V2X, mineral mines, to range anxiety, and even more. In this session, we're joined by Loren McDonald. Loren is a data-driven analyst and consultant that helps companies and organizations better understand the market impact of and opportunities presented by the transition to electric vehicles and corresponding need for EV charging infrastructure. He leverages more than 30 years of experience as a marketing executive, consultant, and evangelist for companies including IBM and Arthur Andersen. He has delivered nearly 200 webinars and more than 300 presentations in 19 countries, and his research and analysis have been cited in the New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, and Automotive News. Super excited to have you, Loren. And we're also joined by Olivier, the CEO of ZappyRide. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I have for you, particularly, Loren, is new data as of yesterday, courtesy of EV Adoption, your company. It shows that EV sales in the U.S. continue to see a significant uptick. We're looking at 7.05% in Q2 of 2022, and that's EVs, PHEVs. So the overall question here is, how did we get there? How do we continue to pump these numbers higher? And surely there have been lessons learned. Definitely interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
Yeah, it's been fascinating in that. And first of all, thanks for having me on. Really excited and looking forward to the conversation. But it's interesting is if you go back and sort of peg the beginning of the modern era of EVs in the U.S. It's basically the end of 2010 when the Nissan Leaf and the Chevrolet Volt came out. And so we started at late 2010, if you will, with 0% EV sales share in America. And so as you mentioned, we passed 7%. And let me just to sort of define that so everybody understands what that is. So that means 7 out of every 100 new vehicles purchased in Q2 in the US was either a full BEV or a plug-in hybrid. And we're actually, if the pace that we saw in Q2 continues in Q3 and Q4, and it's questionable whether that will happen because of the economy and inflation and the rise in prices of EVs and supply chain issues and stuff like that. But if we do, we'd actually hit 9%. And so let's think about this from a historical perspective. In basically 12 years, we're going from 0 to 9%. We're going from 0 cars being basically purchased that are EVs to 9 out of 100. Now, in the next 8 years, by 2030, my forecast is that we actually could and should hit around 50%. Now, I wouldn't have said that 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I was actually at about 30%. That's how quickly things have changed. So, in 12 years, we're basically going from 0 to 7 or 0 to 9, however you want to think about it. And then we're going to go another 40% in the next 8 years. And so, the growth is just, is finally starting to happen. I mean, we were only at 2% a couple years ago, and so it's starting to sort of double. But the reality is, and we'll get into this, is we're still actually in sort of the early adoption phase. We're in the phase still of people at higher incomes who are motivated to save the planet and want to go EV and stuff that are still sort of driving this. And so price increases, things like that, they still aspire to own an EV regardless of the fact that they're getting more and more expensive. And so the real issue, guys, becomes, like 4 years from now, something like that, right? When we start to hit more and more of the people in the South and the Midwest who are sort of late adopters, lower income, are there going to be the vehicles available, at the price point that they can afford? So I know that was a lot, so I'll kind of stop there for now.
No, this is good. And Loren, thanks for sharing that perspective. So I like to compare these to other technologies that became prominent in recent history. And the closest perhaps, or a good analogy, would be cell phones. Cell phones were below 1% for many years, and then it eventually became unstoppable, and we're now probably at close to 100% adoption. Do you think the adoption curve for EVs will be the same, in the sense that after we pass some threshold, it will be just unavoidable and we'll get close to 100%, and that will be the future of the world regardless? Or will we be for a long time in that 50% realm, kind of halfway there, as other technologies are still perhaps good share?
Yeah, no, so great question. One of my favorite topics, and sort of funny story is when I present on stage, I like to use some props and stuff. And so if anybody is old enough to remember the Palm Trio, I pull out a Palm Trio and show it to the audience and see if anybody knows what it was. Everybody always yells out BlackBerry, so they get it wrong. But the point that I make, Olivier, is that we're at like the Palm Trio phase, right? We're at the BlackBerry phase. We haven't actually reached the Apple iPhone phase. So that's kind of first thing, just to kind of think about it from a historical perspective. We're not even really sort of close to the sort of the iPhone moment. The second thing is I don't think it's actually a good analogy for a couple of reasons. One is smartphones had a fundamental and widely understood significant advantage over cell phones. They are a small computer in your pocket that only cost a couple $100 more, if you will, than a flip phone or whatever it is. So they were not just a different innard on them; they were an entirely different device. The smartphone can replace like 100 different things, right? It replaces alarm clock. It replaces having to pick up the phone and call a taxi, right? It's a fundamentally different device. EVs are still just a car, right? They're just a car. They may be faster and have different impact on the environment, et cetera. But until we get to things like vehicle to grid and vehicle to home, which we'll probably talk about later, like they aren't fundamentally changing things. The most important part of this, though, is that cars cost 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, $100,000, and we hold on to them for 7 years, 11 years, whatever. 25% of the vehicles on the road today in the US are 16 years or older. 1 out of every 4 cars on the road today is 16. That means there's tens of millions that are 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, whatever. My point is, and I posted a piece the other day on LinkedIn and wrote an article about this, about the equipment turnover rate. Not to get off topic on EVs, but it's a significant issue. And like California, we're trying to get people to replace their gas water heaters with electric water heaters, or their gas stoves, right? Well, if you don't replace your gas stove this year that you replace with an electric one or some other thing, they last 30 years. So the next time, there's an opportunity to get somebody to replace that gas stove, if they don't replace it this year with electric, is another 30 years. Now with cars, as I mentioned, it can be 7 years, it can be 11 years, it can be 15 years. So when we talk about sales share, what I like to really get people to focus on is a different term and metric called vehicles in operation, meaning actually how, what's the percent of vehicles actually on the road. And when we hit that 50% new EV sales share, if we do in 2030, we'll actually be at probably around 12% of EVs on the road, meaning there will actually still be about 290 gas-powered vehicles driving around the roads on America. So that's a long way of answering your question in that, the difference is smartphones, we replace every 2 or 3 years or whatever it is. It's a low-cost thing. It's a no-brainer. You're getting a significantly better device. With a vehicle, the value proposition isn't as strong. It's very costly, and I may not need a new one for another, 10, 12, 15 years. So it's going to take a long time to sort of replace those vehicles. It could be out to 2070 before we replace like 99% of our gas-powered vehicles.
Gotcha. So in your view, the trend is unstoppable, but the inherent nature of EVs is such that it will just take.
Yeah, it's a fact of time, and the only way we can sort of change that is what I call subtraction by subtraction, right? Whereas if we actually remember the old I think it was under Obama that we had the cash for clunkers,
Yeah.
right? Like, so think about it. As I mentioned, that 25%. So it's about 70 million gas-powered vehicles on the road in America that are 16 years or older. They're going to last, many of them are going to last another 10 years or whatever it is, right? So the only way we can have a significant impact on that is to get rid of those, right? So we need kind of some incentives and programs to replace those older vehicles with, they can still be used or whatever, but more fuel efficient. They don't necessarily have to be EVs, but more fuel efficient vehicles, or it's just going to take forever. So we've got to get rid of that foundation, that base, in order for the numerator, to actually have a quicker impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I like to think about is 7%, great, right? But 93% of people who had an opportunity to get an EV did not, right?
Right.
And what I like to think about is, okay, how do we break that down, right? What's the waterfall there that says, okay, out of these 93%, what's the amount of folks who just didn't know they had the option of going electric? Perhaps it was not even in the realm of their consciousness, right? And then out of the people who did know it was an option, how many did not do it because it was not the right move for them objectively, right? And how many didn't do it because it was actually the right move for them, but they didn't have the information, they didn't have the patience, they didn't have other tactical things, right, that prevented them from either seeing it was the right move for them or executing on that transaction. And that's something, we at Zappy, we think a lot about is how do we get from that 7% to what 100%, and what are the barriers? And, is it awareness? Is it education? Is it the actual transaction? Do people get frustrated with their dealership experience or their charging experience when they test? What's your view on that? Like, how do we break down that 93%?
Yeah, so it's all of those things. But first, let's actually, since I'm data-driven guy, let's actually talk about those numbers for a second. It's one of the other sort of my pet peeves around these EV metrics, in that that is sort of a US average, right? So out here in the left coast, as we like to call it, where I live in California, we'll actually hit 20% this year, right? So literally 1 out of every 5 new vehicles purchased in California by the end of this year, most likely, since we're already at almost 19%, 18 plus, will be either a BEV or a PHEV. Most of them will actually be Teslas, but that's a whole separate conversation. But, Mississippi will just barely hit 1%. There will be about 25 states that are under 5%. There's about a dozen states that are under, 2 or 3%. And so when we think about that number, first and foremost is, we have a very, we talk about sort of the political divide, red and blue states. Well, when it comes to EVs, we have, however you want to characterize it, green and brown or whatever it is, right? We have, a few states like California, Oregon, and Washington, Colorado, and a few others that are, like above 10% right now, right? They're just, they're all in for a variety of reasons. Then we have a few sort of in the middle, but then we have a ton that are just, to your point, they're sort of taking that wait and see attitude. And a lot of it is just psychographics and household income and weather and the lack of electric pickups and things like that. So, foundationally, they're just, income is one of the single biggest hurdles to EVs. EVs tend to cost $15,000 to $20,000 more. Most of them that are available today are at the higher end. They're $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000. And so we just don't, first and foremost, Olivia, we don't have a supply of affordable EVs for that person who lives in Alabama, who's driving a pickup to walk into a Ford or Chevy dealer and walk out, paying, $40,000, right? It's sort of, there just isn't that supply of sort of affordable vehicles. The second part, though, that I know that you guys are really focused on is just, the sort of understanding and awareness. And there still is, there are people that are EV intenders, people that are, already sort of thinking about it. They're inclined to want to buy an EV because they think it's the right thing to do. They're hearing great things about, lower maintenance, and they're faster and it's convenient, just plug in and charge at home. But there's a lot of people that just still, worry about, can the grid handle it? Where do I charge? That it's a evil plot to get rid of my gas powered cars, like whatever it is. Like there's just, there's a massive part of the country that's just not inclined towards EVs. And my view is, let's not worry about them, right? They're not going to buy an EV until 2030, 2035. Like, let's not worry about them. Who we have to worry about today, and the challenge and issues facing us today is, that suburban household with, 2 income earners living in, suburban Chicago or something like that. They have 3 cars, teenagers, blah, 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 right? They can afford EVs. They have a backup gas-powered car they can use to take on road trip, right? They have a 3-car garage. There is no reason they should not and could not buy an EV, and they're not. Right, a lot of them are not. So we have to, to your point, education is really sort of the foundation of this. We have to educate people first that they're available, that they're and the second part of that is the charging aspect of it. Right, to me, the single biggest hurdle besides affordability and availability of models that people want is the refueling process is an entirely new complex experience, and even experienced EV drivers struggle with it. Right, it's a new language. It's as I joke, when you go to a gas station, right, it's typically premium, regular, low grade, whatever it is, right, and but nobody knows what octane is, right? Like,
That's right.
ask somebody what is octane. Oh, I don't know. It's like 80s, 90s. There's like some numbers, and it's underneath the thing that says premium. And I always use regular, like whatever. So I don't even know what those other things are. But if you go to a public, fast charger or whatever it is, right? It could be a 50 kW. It could be 100 kW, 150, 350, 250, whatever. Could be a CCS, a connector, a Tesla connector, a CHAdeMO connector, on and on and on, right? It's like charging curves, like just how do I pay? It's like it literally is an entirely new experience that we're having to retrain people. And that is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, this is I think where we want to go. I think in this conversation is charging. Before we go there, quick observation. Again, drawing parallels with other products. I used to work in the solar industry for a long time, wind energy, and what was interesting back in the early 2000s, these technologies were blue state, right?
Right.
You were talking about the green versus brown versus blue versus red, and to me, a strong indicator of success is that wind power now is not political, right? It's deployed in all states.
Texas is the single largest producer of wind.
Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico.
Yeah.
So, open question that I don't know if you have an answer, and I certainly don't. But I think people are turned off by EVs, quote unquote, political reasons.
Yes.
How do we remove that? And is that the result of just more and more adoption, or is this kind of the fact of the cultural war, so to speak? And as I guess non-political actors, there's not much. Open question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, it's a great question, and there's sort of several things to it. One is one of the fascinating shifts that's happening in the automotive industry is the shift to the factories in the South. Right, the South is becoming the new Detroit. Right, we have billions and billions and billions of dollars going into Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. On and on and on. And so, these are, blue collar, gray collar, whatever you want to call them, sort of jobs, right? There's sort of a mix of those factory jobs, obviously now how high-tech manufacturing becoming. But, it's going to be hard for a lot of those people that work in a factory who are sort of, potentially anti-EV, who are actually building them for their day job and paying their mortgage because of that, right? And so they're literally going to be probably, hundreds of thousands of jobs emerging around EVs and the supply chain, manufacturing, batteries, everything in those sort of red colored states in the South. And, it's going to be hard for them to continue to be sort of, anti when their paycheck, the food is on their table is coming from those EVs. So I think that's something that's just going to start to permeate a little bit. The second thing is to your earlier point, you come from the solar industry, and there's a lot of research around this, around the neighborhood effect, right? And I saw it in my neighborhood, right? It's like this concept of behavioral economics where the first house on the street goes solar, and then everybody goes, oh, that's not as ugly as I thought. And they talk to the neighbor, and it's like, yeah, I saved $1,000 on my utility bill this year, and et cetera. And then next thing you know, there's over the course of a couple of years, there's 5 houses on your street that have solar. And the same thing is happening with EVs. That's what's happening in California, right? It's like literally when I pull up to a 4-way stoplight near I live, oftentimes every single car is a Tesla. I mean, it happens. And so it just sort of becomes, okay, I guess EVs are okay. I guess they're cool. My neighbor has them, right? And, you go to parts of the country, and I've met people that have never even seen a Tesla. Right. And that's, and so now that we're going to have like the VW ID4 as an example, it's going to be produced in their Alabama factory. We're going to start to see a lot more of it. And I think people are going to they're going to start to get comfortable with it. That neighborhood effect, can really be powerful. And then I think, we're just going to, we're going to see a lot of the stuff like the concerns about batteries, and, that the common one that everybody knows is, oh, they're using these kids in the Congo to mine the cobalt. Well, actually, there's very little cobalt in batteries anymore, and most all the automakers and battery makers are going to have zero cobalt, in a few years, right? So we're tackling some of those issues. The grid is getting greener. We're building out infrastructure. So a lot of those zingers, those arrows these people throw at it, we're sort of knocking them off or reducing them one by one, and that'll give them less sort of ammunition. And then when their buddy kicks their butt, when the light turns green, when they're in their, diesel powered Ram pickup, and the guy next to them's in their, electric Ram pickup, it's like, okay, maybe I should take a test drive. So anyway, I know that was a long answer, but there's so much to it.
No, and I fully agree with everything you said. This is the theory of the case that I think the industry has had for quite a while, and it's becoming true. We start to see that happen. Going back to your point about charging, you made the point that, okay, charging is still complex. What's a KW? What's CCS? What's CHAdeMO? I'm having flashbacks here, right? Because when we started the company, when we started ZappyCast, 2017 really, we had the same conversation. What's a KW? What's CHAdeMO? What's CCS? So taking a devil's advocate here, or kind of like uncomfortable stance, like what have we done over the past 5 years as an industry to solve it?
So the industry has done nothing to solve it. The industry, in fact, has generally made it more complicated. But there are sort of two things that are simplifying it or have simplified it. One is Tesla, right? I'm on my second Tesla, and I firmly believe that the only reason to buy a Tesla, it's my personal opinion, is because of the charging experience, because it removes all that complexity. Last week, my daughter and I did a road trip down Interstate 5 from the Bay Area to California and back. And, we stopped at, I think, 5 different Tesla superchargers, and, easy as simple as experience. We stop, we plug in, walk away and go have, breakfast, coffee, whatever it is. And don't have to think about anything. It's really simple, right? Whereas, if you're in a non-Tesla vehicle going to a non-Tesla network, right? You might have to have an account. You might need an RFID card, right? A lot of places you can't pay with a credit card. If you don't have an account set up, you might have to set one up. You might have to call customer support. You have to figure out, if you're a newbie, you've got to figure out if it has 2 connectors on it, which one fits with your card. You have to understand, potentially, if there's multiple different power ranges, right? Like we talked about, maybe if it's only a 50 kW, if it's a slow fast charger versus a 350 kW, and you got to make sure you stop and charge it the right one. But then you have to understand and know if your car can actually even charge at that level, right? Most BEVs can only charge up to, about 150 kW. It's only a small number that can handle that. So not to belabor it, because you guys know all of this and stuff, but fundamentally we haven't sort of really solved it yet, and that's I think fundamentally why Tesla dominates so much is because people know that they don't have to think about any of that. They can take a road trip, there's going to be Tesla superchargers, plug in, and it's taken care of. Now, on the other side, and this is not necessarily meant to be a plug for a company, but I'm a big fan of the company ChargeWay, which has an app and basically is assigned colors and numbers to everything we've just talked about, colors to the charging connectors and numbers to the speed. And you literally, enter what EV you have in the app, and it shows you, and you can put in your preferences, and it shows you where you can charge your car and at one speed. And so you can basically pick a route and say, I want only, green sevens, and it'll route you to that, and you have a simplified experience. So the next thing that's coming really is better navigation software and stuff that simplifies where I charge and how I pay for that, right? And so that leaves plug and charge, right? Which is for your listeners, if they're not familiar with plug and charge, but it's an industry standard protocol that basically creates a Tesla charging like experience. That's how everybody sort of simply explains it, which means you've put in your credit card already in your account. You pull into a DC fast charger, plug in, and it's that same experience. It recognizes the car, the charger authenticates it. You walk away, go get your coffee or whatever, and everything magically happens. Unfortunately, not enough cars and not enough chargers are yet adopting that. And we're already seeing General Motors, as an example, have their own version of plug and charge. It's not even the official plug and charge. So we're making good progress, but we're also kind of screwing it up as well. And so, but ultimately, I think 3 to 5 years from now, that's mostly going to be solved, because all the new cars by then are you're gonna have plug and charge. Most all of the the DC fast chargers will also have it. And from a standards perspective, the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which all the plans were just finally approved as of 2 days ago, the states, we're going to start to see that build out. And they have, minimum requirements and standards and compatibility requirements that are going to serve as the industry default. And I think that's going to help a lot.
Yeah, I see the same with NEVI funding. I think there's a lot of hope there that it will help align standards.
Yeah.
From my perspective, it seems that government intervention has not been extremely successful with defining standards in the U.S. I think there's some hope that it will be the case with this program.
Yeah, and one of the side effects of this is because the NEVI program requires the CCS connector. It's forcing Tesla to actually sort of, if they want to access some of that $5 billion of funding, which apparently they do, and they just came out this week in the US with their connector that will allow you to charge a Tesla with you. But we still don't know what their long-term plan is, if they're going to just add, some people think they're going to add a second cable with a connector. So you pull into a Tesla supercharger and there'll be two cables. In the short term, other EVs will be able to charge there with the connectors and stuff. But how that's all going to play out is unclear. But the Tesla supercharger is by far and away the largest fast charging network in America, but it's not available to the people that don't have it. And so as that starts to change, that'll improve the experience. We'll probably simplify it, all of that's going to drive more standardization and more interoperability, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think all of that, that's to me the single most exciting thing about the NEVI program, is it's driving some baseline accountability and interoperability and requirements. They're going to be the de facto standard.
Yeah, agreed. And I know Tesla, there was talk of Tesla opening their network, I think, to other OEMs. I'm not sure how far that went.
Yeah, I mean, they've done that in Europe in several countries. I think it's about a half a dozen countries now. And the difference, though, what made it very different in Europe is that Tesla moved to the CCS connector years ago, or maybe they already had it. I can't remember. But so for them, they didn't have to worry about the equipment aspect of the connector, because they already were using sort of the industry-wide standard. All they had to do is figure out how they opened up the network and how somebody driving an Audi e-tron, as example, would would authenticate and pay. And so that's through the app and stuff. So that's, I mean, the rumor is they are going to open it up maybe as early as, early next year. But as always, Tesla is not very transparent on these things, and we'll find out when we find out.
Yeah. To wrap the topic of public charging, you have your forecast of EV sales. What's your sense of public charge coverage, availability, utilization? Utilization, as we all know, has been a problem, right?
Yeah.
Or not problem, a key factor, of course, in the business case to install public chargers. And it's been historically quite low, of course. Are you optimistic there that both coverage and utilization and the business case for public charging will look better and positive in the coming years?
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, I've done a forecast. I don't have it in front of me and remember the numbers, but we're not going to hit the 500,000 goal by my forecast. I think from memory I have us at about 350 to 400. So we'll be heading in that by 2030, and that's both public level 2 and DC fast charger. So we're going to add a lot, and to your point. Utilization is often lost in this discussion about, how many how many fast chargers we need. Utilization, and it varies widely, but in non-Tesla locations, it's typically 5 to 10%, meaning there might be only 2 or 3 sessions per day. Now that's starting to change rapidly. You see on social media where, there'll be an Electrify America location where, every charger at an 8 charger location is being used and stuff. And so that's starting to change a bit. And as you mentioned, Olivia, that's critical to the charging networks actually reaching break even, over a couple of years. And that's needed to obviously keep the industry healthy. But, when we think about how many public chargers we need, there are about 24 factors that actually go into that and drive that. One is utilization, right? So if you just think about a 16-hour day, if people charging 6 to 10 o'clock at night or something like that, which is when most people are going to charge. Right now, if only there's 2 or 3 sessions per day, we can add another, 12 to 16 to 20 sessions at that location. So there's a lot of room for expansion at a lot of those locations. So as EV sales sort of grows, right, there's ability to absorb that. The second thing is speed, right? So right now, most DC fast chargers in the US are 62 kW or 100 or 150, right? Again, I'm not talking about Tesla, but the other ones. So the vast majority are 150 kW or under, right? We're only starting to see a lot of the super fast, high power 350s come out from like EVgo and Electrify America. But so they're starting to add a lot more 150 and 350. And the impact of that is, and when you go back to utilization, is you can actually charge. You can get in maybe, another 50% or another 100% of charging session, because you can charge in like half the time or 2/3 of the time that you would have when somebody pulls up to a 62 kW or 100 kW charger. The flip to that is at the same time, a lot of the EVs on the market actually can't charge at very high rate, right? But we're starting to see a lot of, especially like the Korean manufacturers, the Kia and the Hyundais, with 800 volt architectures, and they can charge insanely fast, right? 15, 20 minutes, potentially add a couple hundred miles. And so as we see over the next several years, a lot more of the new BEVs coming out, actually able to charge at 200 and 250 and things like that, that's going to help as well as the batteries get bigger, if you will, but or let's say hopefully more efficient. And so we have a lot more BEVs with 300 plus miles. That has an impact, right? I'll tell you just a sort of quick anecdote. Our previous Tesla was the Model S60 that had about 210 miles of range. Our current is the 100D, which it had 335 when new. It has about 315 now. But when we do that Interstate 5 trip that we've done multiple times to LA. With that larger battery, we can stop, on a round trip, we can stop potentially three fewer times or something, right? And so, as more EVs have longer ranges, it goes back to that capacity issue. You'll need to stop less, right? So, anyway, I could go on, which I won't. But it's all, bless you. It's all of those sort of input factors is why I'm confident that we'll have enough chargers, because we're actually going to need fewer. And the final thing I would say is that way too many people today use public charging when they shouldn't. They use it for like their daily. I have a neighbor up the street who has a Tesla Model 3, 3-car garage. He could easily put in a level 2 charger in his garage, but he charges near his office at a Tesla supercharger. And it's dumb, right? Like, he shouldn't do that. It's bad for the car, and it's a waste. So I think that's the other thing, is we're going to see people realize that level 2 at home, whatever. And so that'll also open up that opportunity.
Yeah. One news that caught my attention, I think it was back in August, ChargePoint announced they would enter the advertising business.
Right.
Kind of follow a business model that's a bit like Volta.
Yep.
What do you think of that? Is that going to be the public chargers and advertising will become combined, or do you see that as one way and not necessarily the?
It absolutely is the future, and is going to be the way. I talk a lot to people, for example, at the large convenience store chain, and they're looking at this as the future, but kind of from a different perspective. So when you go to a convenience store chain, you plug in, they want the video displays to say, come in and use your 7-Eleven or your Circle K app or whatever it is, and get 25 cents off a coffee or whatever it is, right? They're looking at and anybody that's a host site, that's a restaurant, coffee shop, things like that, part of the business model is they're looking at incremental revenue. So for them, the digital display is less about selling advertising and more about driving traffic into the store. So that's kind of a separate model of so that definitely is the future, because people, again, think about it. Gas station, it's 5 minutes. Maybe you go inside, buy a lotto ticket and a coffee and leave. 9 minutes, right? With charging, you're probably going to be there a minimum 15 to 20 to 30 minutes, right? So they want you to go in, sit down, go to the salad bar, buy that sandwich, buy a coffee, whatever it is, right? And so they're really trying to make that connect. For the other shopping malls, retails, and that's really how Volta, and if your listeners aren't familiar with Volta is actually a San Francisco-based company that basically started this trend of becoming actually more an advertising network than they are a charging network. And so they would put in level 2 chargers in front of a Whole Foods or at a shopping mall or whatever. And the idea is it's not about the driver. In that case, it's about all the foot traffic that's walking past that charger, and see that that Whole Foods is offering a sale on organic milk, right, or whatever it is, and they're actually tracking and measuring that impact on footfall and the traffic into the store. So it's definitely with the EV charging business being a really poor business right now, right? They're going to be looking at any and all ways to add incremental revenue. So that's a long way of saying, Olivia, that yes, we're going to, start with the Volta, ChargePoint. Everybody's going to start adding over time, big digital displays, and, whether it's just selling ads or driving traffic, it's going to be, it's going to become the standard, just like we've seen when you go to a gas pump, right? And there's the little video screen and things like that. And hopefully this will be deployed much better and that type of thing than the little video screen. But yeah, I think it's clearly the future. But like anything, there's tens of thousands of chargers already out there that don't have those displays, right? So it's going to, whether they add a separate unit to them, rip and replace, or it's just going to be new ones, we'll see how that plays out.
Thank you, Nath. I think this is an exciting future, I think, for station owners for sure. and the whole ecosystem. Switching gears a little bit to home charging, right? Which of course is 80-90% of the total amount of charging that occurs in the space. Before we start recording, you were telling us about what you see in the space as far as vehicle to home, vehicle to grid. You were mentioning a program that PG&E is running. What's the lay of the land, I guess, for home charging from your perspective? What have we accomplished over the past, let's say 5 years? And where do you think the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, and sort of the first thing is that is that most people that have an EV and also live in a single family home, charging at home is their primary place where they charge. JD Power did a survey a couple of years ago that said that 56% of homeowners actually purchased a level 2 charger. So, more than half actually go out and end up spending. It actually typically costs, the average in the US is about $1,200 to buy the charger and maybe upgrade your panel, hire an electrician to get all that charged or all of that installed. But you don't actually have to. Most people drive 20 or 30 miles. So level 1 or just plugging in to your washer and dryer outlet, which is 240 will actually suffice. But so we're actually sort of pretty well set there. The next phase, as you mentioned, is bi-directional charging, right? Is being able to then upgrade to chargers that you can actually take that power that's in your battery and use it to back up your house in case of a storm, or like we have out here in California, the PG&E fire safety blackouts and things like that. We're starting to see a lot of testing. The Ford F-150 Lightning has those capabilities. It's actually, not cheap to do it. It's probably about $7,000 to $9,000 to make your Ford F-150 Lightning capable of that bi-directional charging. So I think, we're actually a long way from that sort of going mainstream. First, there are very few EVs that are actually capable of bi-directional charging, and the automakers are very concerned about battery warranties and the impact of lots of discharging of the battery on the life of the battery, and there's not a lot of data on that yet. So that's going to be one of the hurdles to this is the automakers' concerns and their lawyers concerned about the warranties, right? I know somebody at one of the automakers, and she said that's been their single biggest concern is the legal liability from batteries. And not just for the charging, but just batteries dying or whatever it is. But so the vehicle to home, as we call it, being able to take that power in your EV and power your house is huge and exciting upside. And it's just going to probably take several years before it most EVs are capable of it and it's affordable, right? So that's sort of the first thing. The other thing that we had chatted about was what's called managed charging or smart charging, right? Which I just started on yesterday. Last night, this morning was at 3 a.m. was the first time I actually turned my Tesla charging over to PG&E in a program called EV Pulse, which is run by the back end, a company called WeaveGrid, which basically determines when's the best time to charge my EV based on demand on the grid, renewable sources, and cost and capacity, right, and stuff. And so that's exciting because that's one of the things that everybody's concerned about. Like right now on my street, there are 3 households out of about a dozen that have EVs. And if we all charge at the same exact time, right now, it's not a big deal. But 5 years from now, if there are 10 EVs on our street and we all charge at the same time, it will probably blow the local transformer. And that's why these managed or smart charging programs are really going to be key, because then they'll literally look at it at the neighborhood level and be able to control who charges when, level that out, and they may not have to actually upgrade those trans stuff. So there's a lot to pack there. And I don't know if you want to talk about the people that don't live in single family homes, because that's really sort of I think the bigger issue.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think the industry is very excited by things like V2G, V2X. Yep. I think a lot of us, I don't know for yourself, but speaking of myself, a lot of us come from an engineering perspective. So we like complex systems that optimize the grid, for instance. I think going back to our discussion about adoption, I personally am not certain that it moves the needle. We talked about the 7%, 93%.
Yeah.
Does the availability of V2G, V2X, move people towards EVs in any way that's substantial? I have my doubt, as you mentioned earlier. There's many other factors that have to be overcome first. But of course, utilities want it, right? I think we all want a system that's optimized.
Yeah, I mean, the utilities want the smart charging aspect. Like they want to be able. Well, they want two things. They absolutely love EVs, right? Because it's literally the single biggest revenue opportunity for utilities in since air conditioning. Right, and that what a lot of people don't understand is that while the number of devices we have in our houses, smartphone, laptop, big screen TV, 6-foot wide refrigerators, on and on, they actually all are getting more efficient. The light bulbs are getting more. So we're actually, even though we have many more devices, the utility electric business has been a declining business because all of this equipment actually uses less energy. And so EVs are the first growth opportunity in literally like decades for the utilities. So they're excited about it. At the same time, as we mentioned, they use a lot of power. And so for them, the issue is how do they manage that capacity, right? How do they make sure that it doesn't blow transformers and they don't need more substations and things like that? And that, you're an engineer and you're a tech guy, and that's why this, the software is going to be the answer to a lot of this, just controlling human behavior and consumer behavior. So that's exciting. But yeah, the long-term impact of consumers understanding that their EV is not just a mobility vehicle, but it's actually a mobile energy storage device where I could, if I have where I work, they have solar canopies and carports, and I can park at work and charge from solar during the day and then drive home and plug into my house. I can transfer that solar energy that was put in during, noon, 1 o'clock, 11 o'clock during the day when there's very low need on the grid for that energy, and then actually use it or send it to the grid between 4 and 9 p.m. at night when there's high demand. Like once we get there, which is about 10 years from now, probably, that is going to be the game changer. It's just not going to happen for a while. But once people recognize that, and the technology is there, that is going to convert a lot of people, right? Because it completely changes what an electric vehicle is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the energy industry, electricity industry is very aware of this and trying to get there. You were about to go into the topic of, I think, multi-unit dwelling.
Yeah.
Which, again, having been in the industry for a couple of years now, it feels a bit like I'm getting a flashback here. We've been talking about how MUDs are really hard, multi-unit dwellings are really hard to penetrate, and really hard to get all these landlords to install chargers at their parking lots. And it seems to me we haven't made a whole lot of progress on that subject over the past, let's say, 5 years. Am I overly negative here? And what's the approach for the?
Yeah, no, I don't think you are. I mean, let's go back and just use some numbers. If you look at if you combine multifamily and condo households in the U.S., it's roughly 40%. So right off the top, when we think about EV adoption, one of the challenges is literally 4 out of 10 households do not have what I refer to them as the charging challenge. They do not control their own charging destiny, right? They're at the whim of a homeowners association at their condo, or they're at the whim of a a couple that owns their garden apartment complex that has 50 apartments in it, and those owners are looking at do I spend $50,000, $100,000 to replace the roof, fix all the cracks in the sidewalk, put in new carpets in the apartments, update the workout room, or do I spend $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 putting in a couple of level 2 chargers, have to upgrade the panels, pull power from a utility, add breakers for the 2 tenants that drive EVs today? right? And if you're that owner, that's, I was going to say it's tough. It's not a tough call, right? You're going with fixing the roof, right?
It's an easy call, the wrong way.
And yeah, and so I mean, what we are seeing is, like many things in business in America, we're seeing sort of a bifurcation, right? Where the large institutional owners of multifamily, it's they want to put on their annual reports and things like that they're all in, that their ESG statements, right? We are green, we've added EV charging and stuff, and for some of them it's like it's a rounding error, right? And so and for new apartment, I've worked with large owners of apartment complexes, and when they're planning new developments, it's like it's now a checkbox, right? Because they're just they're designing the parking lots and the power infrastructure needs and everything like that, and it's built in there. And so that's the positive thing, is all new apartments, and in fact in many markets like California and stuff, it's actually a requirement, right, to add EV charging. And so you're seeing that. The real problem is that we have these sort of tens of millions of older apartments, and we're not putting enough incentives, right? Like, I really wish we'd taken some of that NEVI funding for the DC fast chargers and put a lot of it towards multifamily owners, because they need that push, right? It's very expensive. Some of the utilities actually are offering pretty good make-ready programs and incentives, but it's an expensive undertaking. So I think we actually really do need local, state, and federal incentives in order to solve that multifamily issue. One thing is, I've worked with companies that have what's called a low power, so a level 1 solution. So it's significantly less costly. So you basically put in what's called a smart outlet, and EV drivers have a dedicated parking space, and they actually just use the mobile connector that comes with their EV, and they go in, scan the QR code, plug in, and they wake up the next morning, they've added 30, 40, 50 miles of range, which is good enough for most people. And if they need more, they can go to, the public charging station down the street or work or whatever, if they need to add, a couple hundred miles of range. So I think we need to see, a lot, we actually do need to see some government help to get apartments and condos to embrace this, but also just sort of more innovative approaches and business models as well.
Mm-hmm. Maybe some advertising, as we mentioned earlier. Is that part of the deal potentially?
Yeah.
Cameron, I wanted to pass it back to you. I think you also have a few topics.
Well, I want to add something to that real quick. We're talking about adding multifamily units and the importance of charging there. I actually had a keynote that I was a part of, taking participation in a couple days ago. Austin Energy had stated that the desire for charging is apparently the 4th most popular amenity people are looking for when renting in Austin. So that's something that's on a lot of people's radars, and I think property management companies are going to start taking that pretty seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'll use sort of a parallel. I've done a fair amount of work for the hotel industry, and I actually did analysis on 13 of the most popular hotel travel websites, and how many of them had actually a search filter that you could check the box for EV charging stations at hotels. And about 9 months ago when I did it, it was 8 of the 13. It's now 9, right? And so we're going to see the same thing with apartments, right? When people go to apartments.com or whatever solution they use when they're looking for an apartment, it's going to become a standard checkbox that people look for, not just fitness center and whatever else people are looking for in an apartment. And so it's in markets like an Austin or a San Jose or a Boston or things like that, right, where you have sort of high, Seattle, Portland, where you have high EV adoption. It is now starting to become almost a necessity and a differentiator, right, to both retain and attract apartment tenants. But if you're in Idaho or Oklahoma or something, it's not a competitive disadvantage yet. And so it's really sort of a market by market thing. And I can see Austin, right? I mean, Austin, as we know, is a sea of blue in an ocean of red, and Austin is very EV centric and friendly, and there's so much growth there. That you're gonna, as your apartment owner, you're going to have to offer EV charging there.
I think it's also valuable. They're providing their pretty much all-you-can-charge program for $4.17 per month. That enables property managers to really make it easy for their tenants to understand too, because I think renters have a tendency to know they want charging, but they don't know how they need to charge. They don't know much about peak demand. So making it easy, I think another thing local government's going to have to start doing, and Austin does a great job at it.
Yeah. I mean, and you raised just a massive issue in the industry, which is demand charge, right? And that we could spend a whole hour just talking about that. But and if your listeners don't necessarily understand that, is that most utilities, not all, but most utilities charge significantly higher rates depending on the time of the day based on demand. And it's typically something like 4 to 9 p.m. when everybody's home from work. TV's on, stoves are on, computers are on, air conditioning's on, everything is on. And so operators of charging stations, whether they're level 2 or DC fast chargers, if multiple people are charging during that time, it can actually be thousands of dollars. It can actually cost them thousands of dollars in some cases to charge a couple of cars because of those demand charges. So there's actually some industry associations that are trying to take on the utilities to get them to change how they charge for this, and so that site hosts are not impacted by those massive demand charges.
Yeah, adding to that, just for further background, demand charges come from the capacity of the system, right? It's how much power you can push through the system. And it's been the traditional way of thinking about measuring it. Just like in the bulk power market, you have, capacity pricing. So you, as a power plant, you get paid by the max kilowatt that you output. So I think we're in this interesting intellectual conversation with demand charges, where the way we've thought about how electricity is priced is changing for these reasons. And there's a couple camps, right? There's a camp that says, oh, we really need to think about EVs as a use case, and therefore the demand charge framework paradigm doesn't work anymore. And then you have the others who say, well, you know what, EVs are just another kind of electricity use, right? Another kind of load. And why should it be different? Right? Because the cost of pushing the electricity through the system is still there, right? Whether you charge an EV or run your AC. So regulators and commissions are having this debate, and it's interesting to me that different states are landing on different conclusions.
Right.
People in New York, for instance, I don't know exactly where things will land, but I'm getting the impression that the traditional paradigm of demand charge is just so ingrained in the way people think about the electric power system that it may not change, right? Or it may be wrapped to something else, but it will still be there essentially, while other states may, I think California, trying to work around it. So state by state debates there, and I don't have a good sense of where this is going as a whole.
Yeah, and you raise one of the challenges of yet another one of the challenges for the EV charging industry is not only are all these sort of regulations and policies and approaches different by state and utility, they can literally be different by county and city and things. So if you're a company in the EV charging space, it's mind-boggling how complicated it is. You can't just sort of roll out your programs. You actually literally, might have thousands of different approaches to incentives and pricing and demand charges and connections and all of that type of stuff. So it's pretty complicated. And like you mentioned, California here, where we're debating about the solar net metering, right? And so all of this stuff is sort of intertwined at some level. We're rethinking about, supply and demand and how we charge for.
Yeah, great.
All right. So unless anyone has any further points they'd like to add, I kind of want to take all this together because I know you feel pretty passionately about PHEVs, Loren, and I want to kind of get your input on where do PHEVs go from here? I mean, is the focus completely on battery, or what is it?
Yeah, I mean, this plug-in hybrids is one of my favorite topics. I'm actually a big fan of plug-in hybrids, especially the ones that there's sort of a term for them. We call them strong PHEVs, which there's sort of several aspects to it, but the base is that they have at least 50 or more miles of electric range. And actually today there's a couple of them, but they cost like $150,000. But you know, the Chevrolet Volt, which was the sort of it was sort of like the Toyota Prius was to hybrids. Chevrolet Volt was the icon and the vehicle that we pointed to for plug-in hybrids. But GM killed it a couple of years ago because they wanted to focus just on a single alternative powertrain, which is BEVs. But plug-in hybrids are, from a historical perspective, there's still about 1/3 of the EVs on the road today, and that's mostly from vehicles like the Chevrolet Volt, which was top seller in the U.S. in some years of EVs, the Prius Prime, now the Toyota RAV4, the Jeep Wrangler 4xe. So we when we think about the market right today, so much of the focus is on BEVs. Like I said, still about 1/3 of the EVs on the road in America are plug-in hybrid. Where they go is really a tough one. Most of the automakers are trying to simplify and reduce the number of powertrains they produce, right? So if you think back a few years ago, right, like think about 2018, 2019, it was still up for debate whether hydrogen fuel cell vehicles or EVs were going to win out, right? I mean, we were so early, there was still a lot of debate. Now it's pretty clear that at least for passenger vehicles, EVs have won out over hydrogen fuel cell. They may do really well with like semi trucks and things like that. But so we kind of got rid of one powertrain, but now we still have gas, diesel, regular hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and BEV. And so many of the automakers are going, this is too complex. We've got to simplify. We've got to reduce costs. So you see, as I mentioned, like GM and some of the other ones saying they're just going to go gas versus BEV. And so plug-in hybrids at many automakers are sort of the lost, stepchild or whatever it is. And so we're going to go from about whatever it is, about 35 BEVs on the market today to 290 in 2030 by my forecast. And, we may only add a handful of plug-in hybrids. So first and foremost, just from a consumer of choice perspective, right? When you walk into a Kia or Hyundai dealer or whatever it is, or Ford or whatever it is, there's probably going to be many more BEV models that you can choose from plug-in hybrids. So first and foremost, it's just going to be a choice and availability issue. The second thing is it's really unclear how the CARB 2035 rules are going to impact this. And, and I'll explain that to your listeners, in that the California Air Resources Board in August came out with rulings to, in essence, ban gas-powered vehicles, but it still allows for plug-in hybrids as well as BEVs and fuel cell vehicles. But starting in 2026, in order to get to qualify for what's called the ZEV credits, the zero emission vehicle credits that the state of California basically gives to the automakers based on certain criteria. In order for plug-in hybrids to qualify for that, they have to have that 50 miles of range. And as I mentioned, there's basically no affordable EVs, just a couple of like high-end ones that have that 50 miles of range right now. So the question is going to be, there are a lot of plug-in hybrids that have like 30 to 35, and a few like the Toyota RAV4 that has 42, I think it is from memory. Are they over the next 3 or 4 years going to go? We still see a significant market, especially in the Midwest and the Northeast and the South, where there may be cold winters and people drive everywhere, right? And so they really like that dual powertrain approach. Will they invest in and upgrade those to 50 miles or more of range, so that when they sell those plug-in hybrids, they actually qualify both in California and what's expected to be maybe about another 10 states that adopt those CARB regulations, right? So we could see that. We could see automakers want those credits, and invest in and upgrade it, or we might see them just let them sort of die away, right? And just sort of see how long they can sell plug-in hybrids that have, 25, 30, 35 miles of range. I do know, having had conversations with some people at some of, I won't mention them by name, but at some of the automakers, that they actually are still very bullish on plug-in hybrids, and that they think, especially in the middle of the country, once we start to hit that mainstream market, there's going to be a significant percentage of buyers that still are much more attracted to a plug-in hybrid than they are a full battery electric. And so whether that plays out or not, it's hard to say. But I think plug-in hybrids are they're actually, I think, the better option. Believe it or not. I mean, I drive a BEV and I love driving it. But for solving the GHG problem, right? If we could get everybody to buy a plug-in hybrid, or not everybody. We could get faster adoption of plug-in hybrids because it eliminates the range anxiety. It eliminates the need for DC fast charging, a lot of things. We could get plug-in hybrids into a lot more hands and actually reduce GHGs more quickly. Because basically you're going to drive most of the time probably on electric, right? And the few times a year that you drive on gas, you're still at a significantly lower emissions level than if you were driving regular gas powered cars. So I'm bullish at one level on plug-in hybrids, but I think it's really going to come down to supply, not demand. Will the automakers continue to actually invest in them and produce them at a high level? And B, will they continue to increase, the size of the battery or efficiency to get those ZEV credit? That's a real unknown at this point.
Yeah, and it could be that some make that choice of keeping PHEVs on the table, and maybe it's the right choice.
Yeah, I think Toyota, I think is really going to be the key to sort of watch, right? Because Toyota, as most people know, they are now at 25% of their sales in the U.S. are what's called alternative powertrain. So either fuel cell, I mean, they have the one Mirai that doesn't sell very many thousand a year, regular hybrid, and the plug-in hybrids, which is right now is two, the Toyota RAV4 Prime and the Prius Prime. But if you include Lexus in that, there's now a Lexus plug-in hybrid as well. But Toyota has shown that they're not really excited about BEVs. I mean, eventually they're going to get there. They're waiting. They just have a different view on the market, right? They think people actually much prefer hybrids and plug-in hybrids, and they're actually correct if you look at the numbers, right? And so it's going to be interesting to see, though, if Toyota actually increases, sort of the volume and the number of their vehicles that are plug-in hybrids. Because Toyota, they passed GM last year for the first time ever as the number one automaker from a sales perspective in the US. So Toyota has a very strong market pull and presence. And if they decided, to come out with a Camry plug-in hybrid, right? Or a Tacoma or Tundra plug-in hybrid or whatever, those could be game changing, right? I mean, so so it's really an unknown, but I think as I said, I think it's all about what the automakers decide to do, if they're just going to mostly focus on BEVs or continue to invest in plug-in hybrids.
Thank you. That's a perspective we don't hear very often, at least that I don't hear very often in the space. So definitely worth thinking about.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Well, as far as topics are concerned, that's all we really had listed to talk about today. I'm sure we could get about 10 more conversations out of the content we have. So I appreciate you joining us, Loren. And if you can leave us with one hot take that you see happening within the next year or two, what do you have?
Oh, wow. I wasn't prepared for that one.
Sorry, I like putting people on the spot. It's just what I do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure this is exactly what you're thinking, but I'll sort of roll with something. I think one of the biggest issues that's going to emerge over the next couple of years is the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act and all of its elements in the clean vehicle credit, in that there is a tremendous amount of confusion, and in fact an unintended byproduct of it is it's actually going to increase the cost of EVs. And the average EV is actually going to have a net increase of about $15,000, not exclusively because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Clean Vehicle Credit, but a large part of it. The inflation, et cetera, is already, we've seen almost every EV be increased anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 in the last year. I mean, Tesla raised the price of the Model Y 6 times in 12 months, right? Ford increased the price of its F-150. I think was it $5,000 or $7,000. And what's going to add to that is the battery mineral and battery cell requirements in the Inflation Reduction Act are only going to exacerbate the battery supply chain issues. Most of the battery minerals and cells are manufactured in Asia, and in order to qualify for these tax credits, you have to meet certain percentages threshold. So we're actually going to have to completely, and it's already started, redo the battery supply chain to North America, free trade countries, et cetera. And what that's doing is the cost of battery materials and the cost of battery cells are already going up. So for years, everybody used to tout the Bloomberg New Energy Finance chart that showed this line going down, that the battery cells cost 10 years ago they cost $1,000 per kilowatt hour, and now we're at like whatever it is, 140 or something like that. They actually flattened and are going back up, right? Because there's more demand than there is supply. Now you add to that all of these sourcing requirement, and the cost of EVs are going to go up because batteries are getting more expensive. And again, I'm not blaming all of that on the Inflation Reduction Act, because a lot of this was happening because of more demand than supply already. So think about it. If you're a company that mines lithium in Australia and you're owned by a Chinese company or whatever it is, right? And now you have, now as an automotive company, you're having to switch who you buy from, and 10 automakers are all going to the same supplier, right? Wanting for a very small amount of supply because we've just eliminated a number of the suppliers in the world. Prices are going to go up. So that's the short-term negative impact, is IRA is actually making EVs less affordable. And almost no cars are going to qualify for the $7,500 requirement because of a combination of having to be made in North America, assembled in North America, certain MSRP caps, and all of these battery requirements. It means that out of more than 80 vehicles, we still don't know yet, maybe only 2 or 3 will actually qualify for all or part of. It could be a little bit more than that. Again, we still don't know. And then when you add into those cost increases, the average buyer going into a dealer might actually have to pay like $15,000 more for an EV than they would have a couple months ago. And if they can even find one, right, it's probably going to take them a year to get on a waiting list to get one. So, I'm not anti Inflation Reduction Act. I actually have a nickname for it that I call it the Freedom from China Act, and that it's really a trade policy, right, to shift America into producing our own battery minerals and cells in America and North America. And that's a good thing. I'm just not sure making it part of a consumer tax credit was the best way to do it. And I like to say, is it actually a tax credit if nobody can take advantage of it? Right. So, and it will eventually, right? In 4 or 5 years, these cells and minerals and more factories are going to be in the North America and stuff. And then we'll start to see, maybe 20, 30, whatever, or hopefully more of these vehicles qualify. But, and then that's the whole question is, do we actually even need them? Right.
Yeah. It's a longer conversation than we have time for, but it's really interesting to me because the former tax credit was attacked for really being for the rich. Basically, a lot of it was going to people buying Tesla Model S, X, fancy cars. And there was to your point, there was no industrial policy or trade policy attached to it. It's kind of a blanket check, right? Blanket tax credit. I think now a lot of strings attached. To your point, I think it's going to be a little bit painful in the short term, and certainly will not go towards the same population, right? Or at least by design should actually help people who need help, and will get us, to your point, more independence, which, to be fair, if we want EVs to be, taken seriously and be really part of the long-term American way of transportation, is going to be onshore, right? There's going to be some level of control. Otherwise, it's a strategic threat. So, I think they probably tried to triangulate all these factors and came up with this, and not everybody is always going to be 100% happy with it.
Yeah.
But I'm actually looking in the long term, from my perspective, it seems like a good compromise for these various goals that they which
Yeah.
not easy.
Yeah, and look, like I said, yeah, I mean it's it is already working, right? We've seen several announcements from automakers that they're moving production to the U.S. and that they're changing their they're buying and partnering with different suppliers for things like lithium and copper and manganese and nickel. And so it actually is already working. My point just is, is a consumer tax credit designed to get people into, EVs into more people's hands. The way to do that when it's actually making them more expensive, right? And so I completely agree with you is that in the long term, it's going to have a hugely positive impact on America, right? And bring these capabilities here. But if the idea was to help make EVs more affordable,
Yeah.
it's not going to do that.
At least not in the short term.
Yeah.
And maybe not in long term either.
Yeah.
No, I think that's very fair. The good news though is that just to wrap on this topic, the batteries are obviously manufactured, and there's I think the cost curve is driven by automation and by kind of smart things that probably can be done in America pretty well. I don't know that the cost reductions you may have from labor, cost reduction from doing it in China or in Asia are going to impact the overall cost stack all that much.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the battery issues is a topic we didn't even really sort of dive into, but the battery chemistries and innovation that's coming down the path is really fascinating. I mean, one of the my favorite areas is just the solid state battery, right? There's several companies that are leading in that, and we're still probably 5 years away from when we're going to see solid state batteries in vehicles that any one of us could actually buy. But the potential of solid state batteries is that you can get potentially 50, 75%, and longer term, even 100% increase in range. But in the sort of short near term, think about an EV that gets 300 miles of range from let's say let's just make it a round number, 100 kilowatt hour battery. In 5-6 years from now, with solid state batteries, you could get potentially 450 miles of range from that 100 kilowatt hour battery using solid state chemistry and manufacturing process and stuff like that. Or you might reduce the size of the battery pack down to, and I don't know what the math is on that, to just make it up and say it's 75 kilowatt hour and still get that 300 miles of range, right? And so now you've given people the option to either get that 400 and 450 mile of range EV I need to drive and not stop and use the restroom when I go on a road trip, or you're giving people the basic EV that they need to handle 99% of their needs without stopping, right, at less cost, right? So, and there's just so many other sort of battery chemistry and other innovations that we're seeing. That's just going to be fascinating, right? We've already seen the switch to LFP batteries, so the lithium, the iron-based batteries, which has become pretty much an industry standard that all the automakers are using the LFP iron batteries for EVs that have 250 miles of range. So they're they're less energy dense, and iron is more plentiful, easier to manufacture, safer, etc. They're just not as energy dense, and so that's been an interesting shift. The problem is most of those batteries are made in China, right? And so we're going to have to see a switch on that. But yeah, there's so many just exciting potential options with sort of the battery technology and chemistries and things like that could be game changer.
Absolutely. Very excited with this. I think we'll keep a close eye on that.